Hello, everyone, and welcome to this eighth in the series of clean water webinars hosted by the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds, FOVLAP. We want everyone to note that registration is now open for the annual lake seminar titled Hidden Worlds, Life Under the Surface. Do you know what's going on in your lake? You might be surprised. Which will be held on Friday, June 5th, and will be a hybrid meeting at the South Burlington Library and via Zoom. It is co-sponsored by FOVLAP and Vermont DEC. A link will be placed in the chat. Today's webinar is made possible by a grant from the Vermont DEC administered by Watersheds United Vermont. Lake Watershed Action Plans have identified dirt roads as a main source of phosphorus reduction. Roads are something we can do something about. Today's presenter, Patrick Hurley, will present his efforts to identify, prioritize, design, and implement clean water projects along the gravel roads in the Lake Memphremagog Watershed, LMA Association in the Northeast Kingdom. Patrick is Memphremagog Watershed Association's project manager and leads the organization's technical and programmatic work related to restoration project assessment, survey, design, permitting, and construction oversight. He has worked in various technical roles as a water quality scientist, hydrologist, and ecological restoration specialist. Patrick will take some questions during the presentation and will also leave time at the end for more. You can use the raise hand feature to put your question or comment in the chat, but please stay muted until you'd like to speak. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting the video on our website. Please take time for a brief survey at the end of the webinar. And now I'll hand it over to Patrick. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Can everybody hear me and see what I see? Okay, great. So thanks for the introduction. Yep, I'm Patrick. I live in Newport, and I run the Memphremagog Watershed Association. Just finished up our third Lake Watershed Action Plan, and yes, I can verify that the roads are often one of the smoking guns that we find in terms of the stressors to our lakes. I definitely want to take a moment to recognize Gabrielle Giannoni, my project coordinator, for helping develop this presentation for you all and for being an incredible asset to our team in identifying these projects and help getting them moving. She wished she was here, but she has seasonally pressing things to attend to today. Oh, there we go. So we're going to talk about why gravel roads around the lakes are important. And we're going to give you a bit of a real world summary as to why it's challenging to work on the roads, both public and private roads. We're going to share how we typically identify road projects that kind of fit into the clean water funding realm, because there's lots of overlapping jurisdictions on roads depending on who owns and maintains it. We're going to discuss how we've traditionally developed and prioritized road projects one over another, and some of like the co-benefits or reasons why certain projects kind of float to the top as opposed to some that kind of sink to the bottom. We'll talk about some design considerations that we try to keep in mind when we're working to fix some road issues and protect and preserve the lake water quality. We'll show some examples of road and implementation projects that we've done, and then we can discuss some of the emerging funding opportunities in the state of Vermont for addressing, problematic roads and trying to get improvements implemented on the ground. You all know why we love roads, right? We need access to our houses, we need access to our camps, our properties. It's critical for emergency access. When roads wash out and people are isolated from emergency services, that's a big problem. We also love to recreate, as much as many of us love to get as far away from society as possible when we enjoy our leisure, whether we're boating or hiking around. It's pretty hard to get to our favorite spots without roads. Um, we also definitely need them to maintain connectivity in our communities, in our, with our businesses, our economy, and roads are the lifeline of our economic success. Without transportation and road networks, we really wouldn't be able to do anything. Um, so while we have road networks that may not be as compatible with, ecological needs as we'd like to see, we can't really do without them. So we got to work with them, right? So that's why we're all here. And we prioritize this work because of how important it is for those kind of critical values of our society that we just went over. And it can be a challenge and to work in road settings around waterways, streams, lake shores, wetlands. But we're really committed to doing it because there's so many benefits that come from having functional road networks that are not exacerbating our water quality stressors or our habitat stressors. So we try to work towards flood preparedness and resiliency. We want to maintain aquatic organism passage. We want our fish to be able to get up to their spawning grounds. We want the salamanders to be able to migrate throughout the season. We definitely want to protect infrastructure and property. That goes hand in hand with public safety. And then, one of the things that brings us all here together today is just the water quality impacts that roads can influence, right? So there's a lot of phosphorus locked up in old gravel roads that are sitting on top of really rich deposits and soils that are near the shoreline. So once those things wash away into the lake, there's no capturing and reclaiming that material, those nutrients. So we really want to make sure that the sediment and the nutrients and any other contaminants that might be in our road networks are sequestered or trapped and locked in place. And so, as you can see, roads can also be subject to major disaster and destruction. These are all pictures taken by MWA staff. In previous years, we've had two 100-year floods and a 1,000-year flood around some of our lake communities. You can see on the bottom right panel, that's Gabby standing on top of an old tree stump that somebody built their driveway right through or over. And when that driveway washed out in a flood, you see what was underneath it. It was not really an improved road. They just kind of poured some gravel on top and called it done. And what that means is that we don't have good subgrade in our roads. A lot of these roads are built, as seasonal or temporary access points. And then when nature decides to kind of throw a fit, we start seeing the vulnerabilities of our road networks. And then one of the major things that we try to address is just how costly road disasters can be. Some of these photos are from Morgan, Vermont, that really took a brutal hit in the last couple summers from our floods. And for instance, Toad Pond Road, we lost about a mile of that road. And you can see here, it washed away all the way down to bedrock. We lost probably 40 culverts on that road because they all clogged up with material. And then the water coming down from the mountain couldn't pass through the road culvert, so then it jumped down the ditch. And then it runs down the ditch for about a mile and it takes everything out with it. So this is costing the town upwards of $1 million to repair, and it will be way much more than $1 million to upgrade in terms of improving the flood resiliency. And these are small communities. And Morgan has like less than 1,000 taxpayers in its community. And so being able to support those improvements on a limited tax base is a big challenge. And so having some clean water dollars and other funding sources that can help get us to the finish line on some of these improvement projects is really important. Um, as I like to say, the proof is in the pudding. This is from our Echo Seymour Lake Watershed Action Plan. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we have worked with DEC and lake associations and our partners at the conservation districts, both Orleans and Essex County, to do these watershed assessments that look at road networks, stream networks, lake shores, and we often extend our work to agricultural parcels and working forest lands to try to identify opportunities to improve water quality or protect water quality, improve habitat. And then one of our objectives is to kind of break down what sector the excess phosphorus loading that makes its way into these target lakes, where is that coming from? Is it coming from the farms? Is it coming from the streams? Is it coming from the road networks or wetlands or lakeshore projects or forestry projects? And so we have an ability to use DEC tools like the interim phosphorus calculator, which helps us determine, okay, if this project, if this gully, for instance, is washing away at this rate, what can we estimate the phosphorus loading from this singular water quality issue? How much phosphorus is this generating? Or for instance, a road network, if it's not performing as it should, if it's not, it doesn't have the best management practices that it should, what is the phosphorus loading, the contribution from that road to the overall phosphorus budget? So by estimating the excess loading from all of these different projects that we identify on the ground, we can kind of parse out, okay, of the total excess load getting to Echo and Seymour Lake, 102 kilograms, for instance, per year are coming from the roads versus only 13 from wetlands and 9 from agriculture and 40 from floodplains. And so in this instance, the road networks were a major source, the primary source of excess phosphorus loading. Now, this is a very coarse approach, right? This is not an analytical or an empirical study. We're not doing a total maximum daily load analysis or anything like that, but it allows us to compare apples to apples, or apples to oranges, right? And so there's a common denominator. What's the phosphorus loading? And so in Echo and Seymour, it was a lot of road problems. And a lot of it because of the roads are old and steep and they're on really heavy soils and they wash away regularly. So that was a big takeaway. It's like we need to work on our roads, both public and private. Similar story in the Averill Lakes watershed. This is a very pristine watershed. There's almost 90% forest cover in this watershed and a lot of forest management activities. And while we see about a quarter of the excess phosphorus coming from roads, and almost half of it coming from the forestry sector, there's a big nuance to call attention to, and that is there's very few roads in Averill. There's about 3 real roads, and then a lot of driveways and small kind of private association type roads. But in the forest sector, there was actually tons and tons of trails, right? Skid trails and logging roads. And so those might be classified as a different sector, but it's really at the heart of the matter is the same problem. It's a dirt road. It's a gravel road. And so that's a targeted area that might mislead one into thinking it's strictly the cutting of the trees that is an issue, but ultimately it's actually the access routes into the forest harvest areas that can pose a problem. Do we have a
Patrick,
question, Deborah?
there's a question in the chat. How did you quantify the sections and how could you parse the data into sections?
Sure. So we refer to them as work sectors, and the state has kind of differentiated the work sectors. So if we identify a water quality issue on the landscape, we try to boil it down to, is this a riparian buffer, an inadequate riparian buffer? Is it a stormwater management issue? Is it a loss of wetlands issue? Is the stream and the floodplain out of sync? Are they disconnected? Are they eroding? Are the stream banks falling in? Is it a road crossing or a road erosion or a road ditch problem, or is it a forest trail and road problem? And so when we're identifying these problems on the landscape or opportunities, we have to essentially classify them into one of those bins. And that's dictated by the DEC. And oftentimes it's very imprecise, right? So there's a lot of projects that we identify that are very multidisciplinary. They might have 3 or 4 work sectors that are influencing the water quality issue or the opportunity. So we often see, forest or sorry, stream and floodplain and road projects as being difficult to split because it's often related to a stream crossing underneath a road with disconnection both longitudinally in the stream, but also in the floodplain. And so oftentimes we're lumping multiple work sectors into a single project. But that's essentially how we have to parse it out. We essentially classify a discrete project based on professional judgment and some guidance from the state into these different work sectors. And then we process that through like the interim phosphorus calculator, and then we can assign those excess phosphorus loads to these distinct work sectors. So if it's on the lakeshore, it's a lakeshore project. If it's in the woods on a forest, working forest land, it's a forestry project. It's in paper, it sounds really straightforward. In practice, it's a lot of gray areas. So that's a really good question. There's a lot of challenges with road projects, right? So some of it dates all the way back to the settlement period. A lot of these roads were not built to be roads. They were horse logging trails. They were goat paths. They were a skid trail for collecting ice harvest in the wintertime. They might be a sugaring trail. And then they were built, improved to become a cart path. And then they were improved to be a one-lane road once the Model T got around. And now it's expected to pass two semi-tractor trailers going 50 miles an hour right by each other. That's a serious reality that we need to consider. Is a lot of these roads were not sited. They were just built. They were not designed. They were just built. And it's been Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid for 100 or 200 years. So it's a big realization that some roads are rotten to the core because they weren't built properly or they weren't built ideally. And that's a really expensive challenge to fix. We don't like talking about eminent domain in our country, but oftentimes we do consider like, should this road just be moved? And it's rarely ever done because it's not feasible or cost effective. But there are opportunities where that should be explored because sometimes roads are just in the wrong place. Roads bisect or run tangent to virtually every regulatory jurisdiction you can imagine. Historic resources, archaeological resources, wetlands, streams, lake shores, utilities, steep slopes, confined areas, alluvial fans. There's often challenges with, as I mentioned, the road construction. Is the road crowned like it should be, or is it a sunken road because over 100 years all the materials washed away, or they cut through a hillside and they didn't do a cut slope, fill slope kind of construction. They just trenched right through it. They're often poorly drained or sitting on top of super wet, heavy clay soils or glacial till that does not want to infiltrate water. Uh, they can be just in a bad position on the landscape. Like I mentioned, a lot of our roads pass right through the throat of an alluvial fan, which is where a steep stream transitions to a valley bottom. And you often see that classic fan-shaped debris flow. And we like to put our roads right at that inflection point because it's easier to construct, but it's also exceptionally vulnerable to flood events. There's bedrock, there's ledge. That can be a huge pain in the butt to deal with. As I mentioned, steep slopes have a lot of stream power. There's sediment and debris to contend with, and then there's a gazillion driveways that are just dumping right onto the road or coming off the road and receiving a lot of rainwater. Biggest challenge of all is just a lot of time and a lot of money gets spent on roads. And we're in this cyclical emergency band-aid kind of pattern that we're trying to break free from by really upsizing our structures and improving our road networks so that it's not a reactionary effort, but really a proactive effort. So I'm just going to show you some carnage, some pictures that get everybody thinking a little bit. This is just a driveway in Morgan, and what happened here was not a problem with the road. What happened here was the stream coming down from the mountain decided it didn't have enough space for this flood, and it jumped its bank and it came screaming down through this private property, and it took out a private road. Actually, this is a public road, I should say. It really serves as only two private residences. Um, but you can just see what it did. That's a 5-foot gully right through this yard. And just notice that on either side of the pictures, the grassed yards look almost unscathed. Just a little bit of vegetation and root matter really makes a difference between those unconsolidated roadbed materials washing away, right? And so where we can anticipate, washouts on roads or vulnerabilities, we try to address them. But this one was almost completely unexpected because it wasn't even crossing a stream. This is 300 feet from a stream, and the stream just kind of went squirrely in the middle of a flood event. Another shot from Morgan. This is because of an undersized culvert, or the culvert got clogged. It jumps the road. Not only is it bringing debris with it during the flood, but it's then creating more by washing out the road. And you got to wonder where all this material goes. It goes right down to the lake. That first picture I showed you on the cover slide, that's from the Seymour Fishing Access area and in Morgan. I think I owe Dennis Fortin a shout out for taking that photo. That's a giant delta sandbar that formed immediately after the floods, and you can bet that 90% of that material is roadbed material, and it all came down from our road network in town. And the state spent several $100,000 dredging out that access area. And if we don't improve our structures and improve our road networks, we're going to have to do that again if we plan to continue using that boat ramp. Just another couple of pictures of what a undersized culvert can lead to. Not only can it just get clogged because of debris like sticks and wood and boulders and whatnot, but stream crossings and culverts, you got to think of them as a plumbing issue. If you put a reducer on a pipe, like you stick your thumb on the end of a garden hose, it's constricting the flow. It's going to accelerate the velocity of the water coming out the other end. It's going to pressurize it. That is erosive power. That's elevated erosion potential. And so when we put an undersized pipe in a stream crossing, it's functionally making a reducer and it's creating erosive power on the other side. And so what we try to do in our projects is upsize those structures so that they can pass large floods without having those detrimental impacts. And then there's the less dramatic issues with roads, which is just, driveways and ditches where we see them getting overwhelmed or clogged or the flows are jumping out. We're just losing road material. And where does it go? Pretty much everywhere. In your front yard, in your backyard, down the stream, into the lake. And it's not ideal. It's expensive. It ruins fish spawning habitat. It impairs water quality. It makes that lovely lakeshore access that you have turn into a quagmire of silt and muck when you'd rather be walking on a nice firm gravel bed. And all of this has compounding effects that really devalue our waters and our road networks and just cost the taxpayer an awful lot of money. Again, culverts, they are often the biggest challenge is they're difficult to maintain. You don't think about your culvert until there's a problem, and oftentimes they get buried so quickly that you don't even know where it is anymore. And so improving these, whether it's a driveway culvert or a public road culvert or a stream crossing on a major road, um, really is some of the lowest hanging fruit that we start with our assessments and continue developing projects around these stream crossings because they are really the bottleneck. And then once it gets down a lake, you have large gravel bars, these debris flows, and oftentimes they revegetate on their own and they can provide new habitat in ways that you might not suspect. But these are also incredibly vulnerable to invasive species infestations. When you have bare substrate like this after a flood, and that flood carried knotweed or Phragmites downstream, whether it's roots or seeds or plant stalks, this is wildfire for them. They love bare earth. They love no competition. If they can get a foothold in this new gravel bar or in this new silt pocket, they will take advantage of it faster than anything else. And so we've been kind of really sounding the alarm to our lake associations where you see these deltas forming, where you see these new gravel bars at the mouth of your lake. Keep an eye on them. If you start seeing Phragmites or knotweed pop up, go after it hard and heavy. Take it out right away. Don't let it get a hold because the longer you wait, the more impossible it is to eradicate, and they love to spread and creep. So really keep an eye on these bars and these deposits. And if you can actively vegetate them with native species, that's great. But if all you can really muster is just defensive against invasives, then that's still worthwhile. So we've talked about some dramatic stuff. Let's talk about how we kind of distill all of our information. So this is the Echo and Seymour watershed. You can see a lot of different squiggles on this map. Uh, all of the color squiggles are private roads and public roads that have been assessed for their erosion potential. So we first start by collecting data from the state. You would not believe how much data the state has on public roads. They've all been assessed. Some of them have been assessed multiple times. That includes road erosion susceptibility. What are the ditches looking like? What does the road crown look like? Are there greater berms? Is it insloped? Is it outsloped? What are the stream crossings? So we collect all that data. We evaluate. We essentially pick out the hot spots that are known, but we also have a lot of data that isn't filled in. All the pink stuff you see, those are all driveways that we propose to complete assessments for. And so where we don't have data, we have to go out and infill and collect that data. Where we do have data, we need to make sure that it's accurate and up to date and try to verify it. And that involves getting out into the field. So we'll go, oftentimes, the mud season is the best time of year to look for road problems, not only because everything's sopping wet, soggy, and the streams are flowing, but because all the vegetation is flattened and down and the leaves are down. And so you can actually see what you're looking at. You try to do a road assessment in September, you can't even see your feet when you're standing in the ditch because the grass is so tall if it hasn't been mowed recently. So we're driving around looking for hot spots or verifying data that we already have, making sure it's still, accurate. And then we will actually walk a lot of the watershed. We'll start on the streams, uh, walking from either the mouth at the lake upstream or vice versa. And when we cross roads and driveways and private roads, we start putting on a different lens and saying like, okay, let's follow this ditch. Where is it leading us? Let's follow this stormwater gully. Where is it leading us? Let's inspect this culvert. Make sure that we understand if the data is up to date, if it's adequately sized, if it's perched, if it's a berry to fish. We're noting all this down. We walk around with digital field data forms, a mapping application and a survey application. We're taking literally thousands of observations. I think for the Echo Seymour watershed, we had over 1,000 observations. That's points, that's pictures, that's notes, that's lines. A lot of data that we have to sift through. We do shoreland assessments when we're looking for shoreland erosion from ice or waves or wake boats or anything foot traffic, and then we're really keying in on those deltas and any sediment bars or looking for gullies or stormwater outfalls where there might be opportunities to mitigate some of that. I'm going to take a sip of water. Talking a lot. So there's a lot, as I mentioned, there's lots of information out there. One thing that is still under development is how to deal with private roads. So the town roads throughout the state and state routes as well, they have an established protocol they've been doing for decades. For town roads, it's the municipal road general permit. There's funding through the Better Roads programs. This essentially establishes standards, evaluates whether those standards are being met, provides funding and technical assistance for towns that are trying to get into compliance with their roads. And there's lots of trainings like Rivers and Roads Network or Rivers and Roads courses that try to educate and train and get feedback from road foremans and road commissioners as to what the best practices are, what is feasible, what's feasible, how to deal with really challenging, problematic sites. Say there's shallow bedrock or there's really nowhere to put water. So there's a lot of resources out for town roads. I suspect this crowd is probably more interested in the private roads and the road associations and driveways that are really challenging. There are no explicit standards, but when we do work on private and private roads and shared roads, we do try to adhere to the MRGP standards, the state standards that VTrans has helped develop. Um, and that sometimes works great. Sometimes it's not possible because private roads aren't built the same way. They're often on steeper slopes. They're often narrower. They're often more confined and constrained. The funding isn't as available. So when we're doing assessments and identification, we're trying to figure out who owns the road, who maintains the road. One really challenging one is over in Averill Lakes, where we've got a huge road network owned by the timber company with a state access easement for the public over the road. But really, the association and the private landowners maintain the road. So you got to make sure that whatever you're proposing jives with all of these different entities, which all have different interests. And so it can be a real chore and a real conundrum to try to figure out how to move forward and what to do. Um, and
Patrick,
so,
can we
sure.
pause for a question in the chat?
Yep.
Who owns the property deposited in lakes, the lakeshore owner or another entity? I'm thinking of how to implement planting with native plants. That's from Peggy.
I'll give my best answer, but I'm not probably the most qualified to respond. I would say if it's below the ordinary high water mark, then it's waters of the state or waters of the federal government, waters of the U.S. If it's if it's on your property explicitly, it's probably yours. If you're proposing to plant vegetation below the mean water level or yeah, I think it's the mean water level. I think you technically might need to get a waiver or a permit from the lake encroachment program. If you're moving any of the sediment in significant quantities, you're going to need both a lake encroachment permit and likely an Army Corps permit. If it's at the mouth of a river, that might mean you got to talk to the rivers program. If it's in a wetland, you might need to talk to wetlands program. So yeah, that's where people like myself, Gabby, or conservation districts, the staff at the Lakes and Ponds program, they're definitely who you want to talk to for that. And we have done plantings, in these deposits and along Lake Shore, and it's not painful. You just would rather. It's not easier to ask for forgiveness in this case. You definitely want to double check first. So. So yeah, when we're prioritizing things, we're not only looking at what the assessment information is telling us, what the data is telling us, what those phosphorus reduction calculations might be, and that's often dependent on the length of the road, the condition of the road, how wide is it paved or gravel, what's the ditch network look like, all those things. But we also really try to work with lake associations and the public to capitalize on like the co-benefits, right? Is this a chronic problem area? Is it always washing out? Is this an incredibly important bridge or culvert because of the access? And it's a one way road where if the culvert blows out, then all these people are going to be left without emergency services. That's an important co-benefit if you can address that risk. Are there tangential opportunities to improve stream habitat or floodplain connection or wetlands? So that might help a project bump up in priority. Same goes for fish passage. If it's an important brook trout stream or rainbow smelt or anything like that, that's gonna boost its priority. And in general, if it's flood risk or a flood resiliency project, we're gonna try to give that an extra bonus point because ultimately we do have to balance the realities that this is not just a phosphorus bean counting exercise. There's human elements and there's societal elements that need to be considered too. How many people does this road serve? Is it just serving one camp at the end of a dirt road, or is it a primary artery for 200 camps, right? That's a really important consideration, especially when there's limited funding. So in terms of design considerations, we've mentioned a lot of them today. Who owns it? Who maintains it? Who's got an easement? Who's the foreman? Who's the commissioner? You definitely want to understand all of these things. You want to talk to, if it's a town road, you want to be able to talk to your VTrans district to make sure that what you're seeing is also what they're seeing and what opportunities for improvements that you might suggest jives with their best practices. Maybe you can leverage better road programs or the VTrans structure grants to as match funding, or maybe they can provide technical expertise. Uh, as we mentioned already, there's all sorts of constraints: natural resources, archaeology, utilities, bedrock. One thing that a lot of people don't think enough about are the plow trucks. How are the plow trucks going to ruin your project? And it's not the plow driver. It's not his fault. It's just the fact that plows are huge. They got a lot of power. They throw a lot of dirt. They throw a lot of snow. If you have a beautiful stone-lined ditch, one fall, come back in the spring, and it looks god awful because it's all filled in with sediment and gravel. Guess what? It's working. It's doing its job. But there's places where snow needs to be put. There's places where turnarounds need to be accessible for a plow truck. Culverts, transitions, driveways, all that thing need to be able to pass plow trucks and pass emergency service vehicles. We've talked about, while you're going through design, looking for other opportunities that are off the road. A lot of times when you're working with, road people, whether it's on MRGP or VTrans, they have a very defined right of way. They can't really do anything off, beyond 25, 35, 50 feet from the center line of the road. That's when it's your responsibility to look further afield, look upstream, look downstream, talk to the neighbors. They might be willing to give up some lawn if it means that there can be a stormwater management practice installed that would complement the road that VTrans or the town might not otherwise have the capacity or the jurisdiction to help with. So think about those sorts of things. Look further afield than just the road crossing and the road prism. There's tons of resources out there for stream crossings and road BMPs. There's the Better Roads Manual. There's a VTrans Hydraulics Manual. There's lots of sort of more layman resources. I think it's called like the Stormwater Management for Homeowners and Small Businesses or something that Vermont has produced. There's a lot of great practices in there that are more appropriate for driveways and small kind of shared drives. And then when we're doing a really thorough design or analysis, we start doing some, actual spatial analysis and hydraulics to figure out, are these crossings properly sized? So we will often take an entire road network. So we're not working on just a 100-meter segment like the state of Vermont typically encourages. We're looking at the entire road network from start to finish, and we will inventory every single culvert, every single crossing structure, get its diameter, often try to get its slope. Is the slope of that drain matching the slope of the stream that it's draining? When we inventory all those structures, we can then perform an analysis. It's called a drainage analysis. You can calculate the contributing drainage area to each one of those structures. Not only are you getting the acres that drain to this structure, you're also getting the predominant flow paths. That helps you identify, is this structure in the right place primarily, and then is it big enough? So we can take that existing size, take our drainage area, do a rainfall runoff calculation, whether it's a 10-year, 25, 50-year flood. We usually shoot for 100-year flood. In our area, we've kind of narrowed that down to like a 2.5 inch per hour rainstorm. We got 8 inches of rain in 3.5 hours in Morgan 2 summers ago. That was a 1,000-year flood. So we're like, okay, let's do a 2 to 2.5 inch per hour rainstorm. That's more close to a 100-year flood. We design these really above and beyond size structures so that they can convey the 100-year flood. And we provide design plans for these entities, whether it's the town or lake association, that says, okay, here's a plan that shows your whole drainage analysis and all your drain network. In this image, you're seeing all these green dots. Those are all the structures that we inventoried along Toad Pond Road. These are all the flow paths coming off of this mountainside. We can tell you how inadequate the current structure is. This is an 18-inch structure and it should really be a 32-inch structure, a 30-inch, or a 36-inch structure. We can tell you that. Whether or not you have to put in a 30-inch structure is up to the town. It's up to the budget. It's up to whether or not there's enough uh, soil cover to drive over it or soil depth for bedrock to install the pipe. So this provides these partners with a roadmap, which is a fun way of putting it, to figure out where are our biggest priorities. So where we see places like replaced with a 36-inch culvert, it might be inventoried as a 24, 36, or we'll say a 30-inch. It's got a 30-inch, but we suggest a 36-inch. That might not be the most important pipe to start with. Where in other places, if you got an 18-inch and we're saying it needs to be a 36-inch, that's your high priority culvert. And you can take that into consideration. There's other things that we put on these plans, like this ditch is steep enough that it should have stone lining, or this ditch is steep enough that it should have stone check dams, or there should be some turnouts along this road because you don't need a ditch here. You just need to make sure the water gets off the road. And here are some locations where you can physically do that based on elevations and space. This often requires working outside the right of way. And so you might have to get landowner permission to then extend your turnout just a little bit further from the right of way so that there's enough drainage. So we've provided these for a lot of different roads, both Toad Pond Road in Morgan, West Echo Lake Road, and East Echo Lake Road in Charleston, Jackson Road, and Dana Moore Road in Averill Lakes. And while they're really high price tag projects because of how many structures and how much road work we've identified could be improved, uh, it can be done in piecemeal. It doesn't have to be done in one fell swoop. You can take all this information and target the most undersized or the most inadequate or the steepest areas. You can kind of work through it in a progression and not necessarily have to take out $1 million loan through the town to get it all done in one fell swoop. Um, One thing that is often very common in the lake communities are boat ramps and access areas, and these are really challenging sites. These are the hardest sites that we work on, often because they're really small properties. They're often already developed to the edges of their property boundaries. They're almost always at least 50% impervious surface, meaning it's gravel, it's dirt. Uh, you need a lot of parking. Some of these areas are super popular. Nobody likes to give up parking at a public access area. In places like Averill, the bedrock is like 3 inches below your feet, so it's really difficult to infiltrate water. It's really difficult to put in stormwater improvement practices. So we try to work. We've been working on one in Echo. We've been working on two in Averill, and they're always very challenging sites. Working with Fish and Wildlife Department is really a treat because they do have the ecological, best interest in mind, but they've also got the public and they've also got statutory rules to follow. Um, are we doing okay on time, Deborah?
Yeah, we're at almost 12:45, and can you take a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
And from Josh, in terms of working outside of the right of way, are these formal or informal agreements? What about long-term maintenance of work done outside of the right of way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Josh. With landowners, oftentimes it's well, it depends. I mean, if it's a grant, then there's a formal agreement, and depending on the grant, there might be an access or an operation and maintenance obligation on behalf of the grantor. Um, if it's more of an informal project, it can be a handshake deal. So it all really very much depends. Um, I don't think the town is going to sign on to managing or maintaining things outside their right of way because that sets a precedent that is difficult to follow and extend everywhere else. Um, and there was another part of your question. What was that?
What about long-term maintenance of work done outside
Yeah.
of the right of
Yeah,
way?
I think typically we have to come up with some sort of expectation. So in some places like an Echo Lake at the access area, it's a state property, and they have very minimal funding for maintenance work, right? They can really just kind of mow the lawn. And so we've worked with Will Marlier at the Conservation District to try to convince this lake association to take on spring cleanup of things like a rain garden or things like a sediment forebay. So sometimes you can get formal, low tech maintenance agreements set up or understanding set up so that, a good project doesn't get neglected in the long run.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So I'm gonna breeze through these last couple slides because we've talked about a lot of them already. So, in terms of implementation, we're doing all sorts of things. We're trying to, crown the road so that it has 2% slope going towards the edges from the center line. Removing the berms that get created by plows, by graders, by just tire ruts in the soft, muddy seasons. Working with culverts, we're always working on culverts. We're always working on ditches. We're always trying to shed water off the road through various disconnection practices. One thing that I'd like to see more of is our broad-based dips. That's essentially a water bar that's elongated like 100+ feet, and so you could still pass like a low boy semi truck without bottoming out. And it's not a water bar that was just going to get obliterated by a snow plow. It's a much more gradual dip, and Forest Service uses them a lot on logging roads in the West. There's tons of typical details available from the state resources just to show you that you don't have to go back to the drawing board for many of these practices. You can hand this to a contractor who knows what they're doing and say, we need you to do this along this stretch of the road. And they understand. They're going to get it. It doesn't need to be reinvented. Um, these are some pictures of just successful check dams where you can see just how much sediment is collected behind the one on the right. That's a stone check dam, and that's all silt that would otherwise be carried downstream. And then we have something on the left, a new culvert, and there's tons of road material that's gone through that culvert. And so trying to keep the road material off or out of the stream is a priority, but you're not about to go and dredge out that whole stream at this point because it's kind of settled into its place. We do a lot of bridges and structures. This is a couple pictures of some culverts getting installed in Morgan, a driveway. We worked with the conservation district from Orleans County. This landowner gave up their entire driveway. They said, this is a problem for us. It always dumps water into our house. What can you do? So this is a three-tiered infiltration practice that was planted. It's a perennial garden with a porous under or subgrade. Water coming off the road actually percolates through those planting beds and into the ground. And it's been a really great project. It's been a good success. And then on the right, we're replacing a private crossing with a bridge because it was just hit by three back-to-back floods. Um, Here's some of our projects, but we don't need to go through them because I've mentioned some of them already. Some of them are complete, some of them are in progress, some of them are in design. But, we really are working a lot in our watershed to try to address these lakeshore roads. And I guess at this point, it's probably time to open up for questions. So I'm going to leave you on this slide. If you want to get in touch with us, we're happy to, talk more about this offline. It's getting to a busy time of year, though, so it might be a little while till we get back to you. But yeah, if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to address them in the next 10 minutes.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. Sean, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. We live on Lake Fairley, and we have one major dirt road, Robinson Hill, that extends for about a quarter to a half mile along the road bank. That road continually has new material added to it every year for mud season or winter maintenance. And as it gets graded, the it continues to widen. So I think at the latest measurement, I saw your dirt road at 12 feet. We're looking at probably 19 to 20 feet wide right now. Um, and it continues to widen every year. I'm not sure how to stabilize that or how we could, what's the best way to try and stabilize that or reduce the width of the road.
Is it a private road?
No, it's town road.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's definitely a conversation for the select board, right? So there are some instances in our watershed where we've seen some sections of roads that are kind of over widening, and whether that's because of the snow plowing, just kind of ever creep the continual creep outward, or because it's a nice shoulder to pull over on and access the lake without trespassing. Those are all things that we've tried to work with towns to address. Primarily, the town should have a map of all the roads in their municipality and what class it is, right? So if it's a class 3 road, say, or Class 4 road, they're going to have narrower and narrower right of ways based on those roads, and they vary quite a bit. Typically, it's I think 25 feet 25 feet from center line for 2-lane roads. So that's a 50-foot right of way often, and so that's something to consider. I think most 2-lane gravel roads are about 22 to 24 feet wide. So it's important first to talk to your town and get the road foreman and commissioners involved. And then there are ways to narrow the road and keep it within safe dimensions. And if that means, cutting the shoulder down so that there's less travel lane width, and then stabilizing that shoulder with, a stone kind of a embankment or a toe, that might be one way. Guardrails, but those aren't cheap, and they can be, snowplow challenges. But yeah, my recommendation is you definitely want to talk to your select board before you go messing around the right of way, because nobody's going to appreciate that.
Oh, no, no, you're right. And we have this is an ongoing conversation with the select board for the past, I think, probably 10 years.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
just hasn't been dealt with. So, but I
yeah,
appreciate the insight.
sure. On that note, there's often a lot of challenges with greater berms. Some folks don't want road runoff, water coming off the road onto their property. The unfortunate reality is that is a legal precedent. You, as the down gradient property owner, you must contend with what gravity provides to you. And there are ways to go about that that are somewhat malicious and unproductive, and there are ways to go about that that are very productive. And I'm pleased when select boards are willing to say, you know, this berm that's been built along this property line in our right of way is actually causing more problems for the downstream neighbors than if everybody just took their fair share of the runoff. And so they've actually committed to going and scalping off those little berms. And so that water leaves the road faster. You might get a little bit more water in your yard, but it's not a torrent for that person at the bottom of the hill. So, there are definitely give and take when it comes to properties along the roads. And I understand like a lot of these lakeshore properties are like a 16th of an acre, right? You only got so much room to work with. And that's just, the sad, tough reality of having a very small property on an old road right next to a lake.
We do have another question in the chat. Whoever wanted to ask that, do you want to unmute and
Sure.
ask?
So, does replacing a town dirt road with a paved road built up to standards generally result in lower nutrient loads to a lake that's hydraulically connected?
You know, I want to say probably, yeah. You're going to have a lot more, or potentially you'll have a lot more volume, runoff volume, right? Because you're not getting much infiltration. But that said, most dirt roads don't infiltrate water very well to begin with. Um, it runs, it's probably less prone to like tire ruts and little rills and gullies that form in mud season, and then that dumps into the road. So I would say in general, yeah, a paved road will generate less nutrient runoff, but it could also generate more volumetric runoff. Um, it's less likely to, trap oil and grease. Um, yeah, yeah. Otakichi's saying the salt input, yeah, salting paved roads definitely not conducive to, less chloride in your water. So yeah, I mean, I don't. The other problem with just throwing asphalt on top of a road with terrible subgrade is that it's just going to heave and buckle, and then it's all going to crumble and fall apart, and your snowplow is going to tear it to bits, and then the town's out a bunch of money and obligated to continue maintaining this road. So yeah, it all depends.
Any
I had,
other questions? Oh, yes, go ahead and
oh,
unmute.
sorry. I had one more question. I didn't put it in the chat, but this is Sean Brown from Lake Fairleigh Association. I was just wondering, one of the things we always talk about when we develop our LWAPs or try and mitigate runoff and phosphorus loading issues is funding. And I was wondering, we complain a lot about the lack of funding and towns not having enough money to do the work, but I was wondering if if you could provide some insight into alternative funding sources that we could be reaching out for grants or um, other ways to fund these projects that we're just not tapping into.
Sure. Yeah, I know that some of our partners at Orleans County Conservation District have got uh, awarded grant funding from WUBS enhancement block grants to work on private driveways. So kind of batching multiple private driveways into a single project effort. I think this might be the first one that DEC has funded in terms of private driveways, explicitly working on like stormwater practices. Um, so the enhancement grants might be valuable. I know that they're going to heavily prioritize private road association type roads where there's more people being served by that road. Um, and match goes a long way. If each landowner can throw in $1,000 or something, that's going to go a long way in a grant application. I'm not aware of other funding programs at the moment. Um, in terms of, if it's a multidisciplinary road project and there's culverts involved, we've often received funding from the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Or I know other partners like in Essex County are really good at getting the East Brook Trout Joint Venture folks involved to improve fish passage, which has all sorts of benefits when you're just improving a culvert crossing. So yeah, I would talk to your conservation districts. I'd talk to your watershed associations or your basin planner, and they can help kind of flag those opportunities and vet them for you.
Great. I think we have time for one more
Ye-
question. Kelly?
Kelly. Thank you. I was just curious, Patrick, can I email you? Do you do these webinars like for any group organization around the state? We have an LWAP getting ready to be conducted down here in Windsor County on the Black River watershed, and it would be great to. I'm getting a lot of energy around the local lake association and the connected lakes, and there's our paved road, and then there's a whole network of gravel roads on the other shoreline, including some housing developments up and into the hillsides. So stormwater is a huge part of my messaging, and this was fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, Kelly, you can send me an email. It kind of, again, it all depends. We're
Yeah,
getting into busy season, but yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you offline about it.
great.
We'll also have a recording with the presentation on our website if Patrick isn't available to come right away.
Great.
Are there any other questions, Deborah?
There's one more
Um,
from Josh Karp. How do you get these detailed road assessments done in our towns? The town could request better roads funding. Your regional planning commission does the um, road erosion inventory assessments, which we do similar work or similar assessments too, but ours are a little bit different. If it's in a lake watershed, you can petition DEC for Lake Watershed Action Plan funding. In general, I would start with your select board and try to get in touch with your regional planning commission, and they might be able to get you in touch with the MRGP program to see kind of where you fall in the overall state priority list for getting those assessments done.
Hey, do you see any other questions, Deborah? Anybody else have questions? Um, I'm Pat Swazi, I'm president of the Federation, and I'd like to thank you, Patrick. This was fabulous. Really, really interesting. Lots and lots of information. So, as Deborah mentioned, we've been recording this, so we will be posting it to our website, and we'll post the PowerPoint as well. So if you want to go back and review, because I think I need to go back and review and really absorb all of this information. I also want to thank Deborah for organizing us, Jerry for doing the introductions, Dave Johnson, also for his help on this. Jeremy Jones is on here for his help, and the other members of the events committee, Jackie Sprague and Jan Parsons and Laura DeLugalecki, for all their work in getting these webinars organized. A reminder that there is a very brief survey. So as you leave the meeting, that'll pop up. If you'd fill that out, that would be a great deal of help. And also, as Jerry mentioned, our next event is the Lake Seminar. And that is always the first Friday of June. This year it's June 5th. It is hybrid, so if you can come in person, it's always great to see people in person. And that's at the South Burlington Library, and it will also be via Zoom. And the topic, Hidden Worlds, Life Under the Surface. What's going on under the water? And I think it's going to be really, really interesting. We have some terrific speakers. One of our closing speaker will be Julie Moore, Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. And our opening keynote speaker will be Declan McCabe from St. Michael's College. He's also the author of the book Turning Stones, which is all about what goes on under there. So I think it's going to be a great day. And registration is open on our website. Again, registration is free. But of course, we always appreciate your donations that help support all of the work we're doing. And with that, we are adjourned. Again, thank you, everybody, and hope to see you in June.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick.